While extremely glad for the engagement and extensive conversation had in the comments of my previous video, an interesting, albeit predictable, topic to come up often was how you're just playing the game wrong. D&D has plenty of roleplay mechanics. Just look in one of the 8 supplemental books for the optional rules buried inside. Combat is roleplay. You're playing the game with the wrong people. You're not good at DMing if you can't adapt roleplay into your game. Just homebrew D&D. And, most importantly, why do you need roleplay mechanics? Besides all of these points being addressed and ignored in the video, I want to very simply condense my critique of D&D's roleplay interactivity. And mind you, throughout this video, I will refer to combat as literally fight scenes and acting as a tactics game, and roleplay as everything that isn't directly related to succeeding in combat. It's not that D&D can't be homebrewed. It's not that it doesn't have the tools to make it more roleplay oriented. It's not that roleplay isn't inherently present. And it's not that D&D is a bad game for not focusing on roleplay. However, it is that it does not have well-incorporated roleplay mechanics. Roleplay is not given a fraction of the agency that combat is. And stapling on roleplay mechanics to this game and altering things creates lack of balance and becomes a cluttery mess. Adding to one place detracts from another. Adding optional rules doesn't incorporate into the game so much as it becomes mechanics that are separate from the game as is. I've played D&D for half the time I've existed on this earth, with probably over 100 people. I'm not pulling these points out of the air. I've done all these things. I've experienced the outcome, and had great success and great sessions and great memories. But it was still more work and effort than when I simply moved on to other systems. Designing the game for Wizards of the Coast is more effort on the DM's part than it should have to be. It's like when coders keep tacking patches onto a project for years and years, until it becomes a mess of spaghetti code that's hard to navigate and creates more problems and bugs the more you add on, instead of starting over from scratch and making the code function as currently intended, from the ground up. But see, the thing is, putting this back into RPG terms, we as players don't have to build anything from the ground up. That's already been done for us. There are games that from the start are built to incorporate storytelling and roleplay without having to change anything. I want to address something I mentioned in the video and that still gets brought up in the comments. Why do you need to gamify roleplay? Why do you need mechanics for something that players have been doing for decades without specific rules for? The slightly complex answer is actually very simply summarized. It's more engaging. D&D and other combat-focused systems like Pathfinder are engaging when it comes to fighting things and making a character suited for fighting. But these days, so many players have joined the hobby, and so many are so diversified in their reasons for playing. Roleplay stands out as the reason a lot of people enjoy playing. Not everyone, but a notable amount of people. And mind you, I don't mean putting on a funny voice and acting out character dramas. Engaging roleplay mechanics can make a big difference to their enjoyment of the hobby, and they can be as engaging as combat mechanics without damaging or removing combat. Here's what I mean by that. In most systems, roleplay scenarios are decided by a roll or two that simply decides succeed or fail. Now imagine if combat was handled this way. Instead of these grand epic battles, it was simply roll a d20 to see if you slay the beholder. Aha, success! The beholder is dead. That would be incredibly anticlimactic, but that is how roleplay is handled. In combat, you have to watch your HP, gauge your resources, look for windows of opportunity, see which of your abilities are useful and relevant, coordinate with teammates, deal with other hazards, and the stakes changing. Why can't roleplay encounters have similar engagement? Instead, most of the games have none of this for their roleplay and storytelling without the DM's input, and designing that aspect of the game as you play, even though the system could. Look, I'll even break down my previous example as a comparison. HP, a way of measuring when the person you're persuading, intimidating, or deceiving gets tired of the encounter and you fail. In D&D 4th edition, they had a neat mechanic where you needed either a number of successes or 3 failures when persuading, deceiving, or intimidating someone. Also used to measure success or failure of other non-social skill challenges outside of combat. This was pretty good for utilizing these skills that get underutilized since you can't just roll persuade 3 times. And added a clear indicator of if the conversation is going well or not, without devolving into arguments of, oh come on, that was a great argument. Nah, this character isn't convinced. In essence, it added HP to social encounters. Resources. Easy examples are material goods and social influence. You can bribe someone, or play up connections you have to important people, or people relevant to the social encounter. The Duke will be more likely to listen to you when you flash your credentials as heir to a prestigious company. The guard is more likely to look the other way with a handful of money coins in his hand. Windows of opportunity. A colloquial example of this is, don't play your hand too early. If you say, I know the mayor, as soon as you're trying to get past a guard, they'll think you're bluffing. Yeah, and I know the emperor of the world. Get out of here. Instead, if you play this idea once you've already planted seeds of doubt and done other things to express your influence, such as flaunting your wealth or social status, it'll have a lot more effect and he'll be more inclined to believe you. Coordinate with your teammates. Another pretty easy example. It's a team game and your teammates contribute to the roleplay scene, either giving their own input, using their own natural abilities to influence someone's opinion or the conversation in general, or playing up being connected to one of the other resources you're utilizing. Beckingham, old chap, I haven't seen you since the gala. Tell me, how was the governor's daughter? Or the good old-fashioned distract him with conversation while a teammate sneaks into the building, or pickpockets him, or whatever. Other hazards and stakes. Maybe something distracting occurs to detract from the conversation. Maybe someone who actually knows you shows up and can see through your bluff, and now you're playing two social games at once. Perhaps the enemy is an uncanny persuasive person themselves, and they can outwit you. Suddenly, the stakes are raised, as is the challenge. As you can see, there are plenty of ways to gamify and make role-playing as engaging as combat. These kinds of standards can be set on anything from conversation, to infiltration, to detective work, to everyday tasks. These ideas can also be easily utilized for D&D, but with less engagement and creative opportunities than combat. If only a system could incorporate all of these into a gamified core... Oh, wait... I once ran a Blades in the Dark session where the players had to bake a cake using old equipment in an old kitchen, just to show how the stakes and decision-making can be engaging inherently, and how creative solutions can be integrated into gameplay, and how the game itself can make anything they're doing both fun and practical given the right circumstances. Side note, that was one of the best Blade sessions our group ever had. I know I reference and kiss Blades in the Dark's butt a lot, but that's because the game actually has rules and mechanics that utilize all possibilities. It's simple enough in its mechanics that it can fit any of these scenarios and complex enough that you can fill in the necessary gaps and possibilities just using the rule set as is, without referencing and cherry-picking optional rules from 3 or 4 other books. That's not to say Blades in the Dark doesn't have its own clunkiness and barrier to entry just like any other RPG. My point isn't how great the game is, this time. The point is that it's easily utilized for more than just combat without having to modify, homebrew, or cross-reference anything. Using its own mechanics and creating opportunities for players doesn't detract from its other mechanics and opportunities for players. A game that partially uses this system is Icon, one I haven't gotten to play yet, but made by the creator of my favorite comic of all time, Please Notice Me Senpai, etc., that has separate systems for combat and roleplay, the latter of which mostly utilizes Blades in the Dark's rules. It's not my favorite solution, and I'd prefer if it was somehow able to integrate into one system instead of having to essentially learn 2 to play one game, but at the very least you have development and mechanics for roleplay, and hardcore tactical combat. One doesn't have to suffer for the other to shine, and if you prefer one, you can arguably just not interact with the other. It's at the very least a compromise. Using an example of another game who I don't constantly suck up to, City of Mist. A lower profile game that still has extremely loyal followers. I personally found the game a little clunky and almost experimental, but what matters is that it also uses the same rules and standards for any scenario in the game. Whether it's combat or roleplay, your character's specific abilities have to have a describable way of applying to a situation. A character's body being amorphous can apply to squeezing under a door to sneak in, or absorbing impacts from blunt trauma. A character having Professor Xavier telepathy can use their ability to detect someone's true intentions in a social encounter, or turn an enemy on their ally during a fight. It uses tags that apply to these scenarios, with things like wet floor -2, which will make it harder to, I don't know, sneak into a building undetected or keep steady footing during a brawl. A tag of dressed up pretty, +1, could be used to persuade someone to follow your lead, or make it harder for enemies to attack you if they're attracted to you. Boom! Roleplay given mechanics that not only don't interfere with fighting and combat, but comprehensively share the same space and work together. Whether you're fighting or persuading someone, whether you're infiltrating a building or blowing it up, whether you're remaining stealthy or creating a loud distraction, you're using the same system, the same abilities. That's what I'm talking about when I say engaging roleplay mechanics. That's what I'm saying when I say D&D is just not good at that. These aforementioned games don't require changing anything to make it work. They're airtight in their own space, while D&D is tight in its space, which just is not roleplay. It has instances of things being really good roleplay mechanics. The Wild Magic table is a fantastic example of mechanical consequences to something happening in the narrative. The old rule of paladins having to stay within their moral alignment or risk losing their powers is another great example. But in D&D, that's what it takes for roleplay to be reflected in the game. Extremely specific, fringe case scenarios that don't interact with the rest of the game. If roleplay mechanics just didn't matter, there wouldn't be tons of games specifically trying to make it matter more, or games trying to at least make them as well-defined and solidly built as its combat. Tabletop RPGs are a social experience. They're the one medium of interactivity where you can actually, truly change it to be any gameplay you want. Video games try their best to emulate this, but the best we can achieve for now is extensive dialogue trees and pre-programmed interactive environments. That's the thing though. As far as combat goes, a lot of games have had strategic combat refined really well. And they're even multiplayer, so you can still get a social experience out of it. But in my opinion, roleplay can only be done to its fullest and truest in tabletop RPGs. And I think that is absolutely worth noting and exploring. You're not bad at roleplay if you prefer a game with little to no roleplay mechanics. I don't think you're in the wrong for homebrewing and making D&D work for you. Hell, if a family or friend member invites me to D&D, I'm still going to say yes because it is still fun. But when I'm running a game, I don't feel like wrestling a rule system and doing hours of studying and homework to make it do something that someone else has already done the studying and homework for. I don't want to remove the challenge or value of success by allowing players to have the freedom that I want to and am going to give them. I want players to feel important and special and powerful outside of their capacity for violence. Hell, even including their capacity for violence, if that's what defines them. I want them to feel stimulated and engaged through creativity and being a good player, while being free to express themselves and be whatever kind of character they want, with minimal limitations beyond their own whimsy and sense of imagination. For me, that's what these games are all about. And I'm thankful to the games that give us the tools to live out this escapism to its fullest capacity. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe for more RPG content, and follow me on Blue Sky, Instagram, or other social medias I'm probably ignoring on accident. If you'd like to try out a game, hit me up on startplaying.games. Until next time, I hope you get a game in this week. Take care.